The construction and property sectors are facing a skills crisis, and that skills crisis can be characterized into two elements. One is a workforce gap, and the other is a skills gap. So, by workforce gap, we're really looking at a shortage, an absolute shortage of workers across the various operations and activities that we carry out as an industry. That ranges from site operatives and tradespeople, where we have real pressure in relation to not enough people coming into the industry relative to people leaving, including the demographics of an aging workforce, but also in professional technical skills. We have pockets of shortages of people skilled and qualified in particular occupations. We also have this skills gap, which is slightly different, which is about the mismatch and what is the growing mismatch between the skills that are required and the skills that people have. And that skills gap is relevant in the context of things like green and decarbonisation, where people are having to learn different approaches to their job. Regulatory reform means that we are having to put things together differently, high performing buildings, the Building Safety Act, all of these things have implications on how people have been taught to do things, whether it is on-site skills or professional technical skills, design, project management, etc. So the combination of those two aspects, both the skills gap and the workforce gap, are putting real pressure on the industry at a time when the need for the industry to deliver and support economic growth has never been as great. So one of the issues that the construction and property sectors are both facing at the moment is the concept of role and competence inflation. And by that, I mean that in a labour scarce market where actually the demand for skills outstrips the supply, it becomes an imperfect assessment of people's competence in that process of people moving jobs, setting the wages that they are paid, and ultimately you have a greater propensity for people to be performing above their core competency and being paid without there being a commensurate improvement in productivity, which is really important for the industry to be able to deliver. Because if we're going to pay people and we want well-paid jobs, we need to fund that through improved productivity. And at the moment, we're still struggling with our industry productivity. So that risk of people being over-promoted, moving around the industry more and more frequently for both a promotional benefit, but also for wage benefit, is something we need to be careful of. And this has disproportionate impact in more senior management roles in the industry. If people aren't competent to perform senior roles, then the impact and legacy that leaves on projects downstream can be massive. And this is really returning to the issue of making sure that everyone is competent in their role and that we do not over-promote people to roles that they're not able to perform, that they're adequately supported, that if they do have limitations in their capability, they're able to be supported by their employer to ensure that they can carry out the role that they are being paid to do. So there's a real challenge as to how the construction and property sectors increase capability and competency without impacting on productivity. So that ultimately is a challenge which brings in the need for technology and technological innovation, the ability to deliver differently with finite resource. And the applications that we're going to see around digital technology, particularly the advent of artificial intelligence, have a massive opportunity, particularly in the professional services and technical arena, in knowledge-based workers, to transform the productivity of workers. And this is not just about automation. This is not just about replacing workers with tech. This is about augmentation. This is about how professional and technical service workers use technology to augment, to improve productivity, to improve bandwidth and capacity to deliver their day's work. And that's going to be a key theme as to how we're going to get more productive in the sector. We also need to think about how we upskill and reskill without dragging people away from the workforce. So there's a real intricate need to balance that ongoing need to drive competency and the currency of that competency with large programs of upskilling, which actually can happen on the job, may involve virtual learning and e-learning, and don't require big segmentations away from the workforce at college. And it also is going to make it easier to embed that upskilling and reskilling profile into the workforce. And it's done in a way that is more user friendly and actually the workforce is more amenable to. So one of the problems that the construction sector has is the cyclicality of its workload. It's notoriously sensitive to economic fluctuations and the background economy. And that is an issue in terms of the propensity for firms to invest in skills and training. So one of the challenges is how do we get around that? How do we better plan for the investment that's required in skills and training, for the investment in the workforce when we have this quite limited visibility of the work that's happening? And I think there's a real need and there's a challenge for the industry to develop its strategic workforce planning tools. So we don't really have a one single go-to point where we can plan out what work is likely to be happening in different sectors and different geographies at different times that has a high level of confidence. You can track planning applications and things like that, but actually the tools need to be more sophisticated. They need to be about risking the probability of work happening. Also the role of public infrastructure spending is really important here. The government has a big role to play in smoothing some of those economic cycles such that the industry has a floor of demand put underneath it, such that if there is a private sector downturn, government actually is spending more on public services and public programs of infrastructure, housing, schools, hospitals, etc. So I think there are some tools in the armory to reduce the impact of cyclicality, to help businesses plan and invest, because ultimately that's the biggest barrier to skills and training. It's not going to be bulletproof and it will never be perfect, but I think there's lots of things we can do. And I think it's a partnership between industry and government that's going to help us resolve those issues. So what strategies can the industry adopt to improve the competency of the workforce? For me, there's a really important coming together of two different aspects of how we train, certainly the professional cohort within our industry. The first is the assessment of professional competence that most institutions and professional bodies install as being the entry point of coming into a profession. That APC standard is the sort of pass-fail of becoming a professionally qualified person in the industry. But it's also the linking of that with the ongoing maintenance of that competency through a continuous professional development CPD program. And those two aspects are going to be increasingly important as we enter a phase where the industry is having to deal with quite a lot of change, rapid change, regulatory change, technological change, lots of innovations around material science and the way in which we build and the materials we're using. So the need to keep that currency of your competence through that CPD is going to become more important. The way in which it's policed, I think, is also going to become more important. So whether self-certification is the way forward, whether it needs to be more rigid or more black and white in terms of how testing is done through the CPD process remains to be seen. But I think it's the key challenge that we have in terms of maintaining the competency of the workforce.